Good evening and welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Street Memorial Library Virtual Book Club. Tonight I'm excited to be joined by the Red River Readers Book Club, and we're going to be discussing Kristin Harmel's The Book of Lost Names. This incredible book was inspired by an astonishing true story from World War II, where a young woman with a talent for forgery helps hundreds of Jewish children flee the Nazis in this great historical book. It starts off with Eva Abrams, a semi-retired librarian in Florida, who is shelving books one morning, and she just happens to see a book that she recognizes from long ago, the Book of Lost Names. And then we get to learn all about her story and what happens. So now we're going to begin our discussion. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to lead the way.
Hi, Maureen. Hey. Uh, our author began her writing career rather young as a teenager. At the age of 16, she started off as a sports writer for her local newspaper. And throughout her writing career, she also continued to write for other newspapers as well as periodicals, including Glamour. She has also written 10 books, including The Winemaker's Wife, which I highly recommend. We have several copies in our system. Our author did very extensive research for this project. She visited numerous libraries in Europe, particularly the one in Berlin. Uh, she learned from that fact of her research that millions of books and other artifacts as well, including great art pieces, were stolen or looted by the Nazis. And so it becomes a quest of numerous people throughout the ages to have these items recovered, and certainly our precious books, right? And so she has learned about a particular item that really did exist. And so this is the framework for our novel. And it includes the factual events, particularly those about the valuable work of forgers, especially for those who did numerous false documents for those precious children. And I'm gonna ask a leading question. Is a novel based upon an actual book that actually exists or existed?
Well, I think so. I think you just said it was, if I heard you right.
Right. Good to see you, Miss Birdie. It is a yes and no question in a way. It's almost like a trick question. The book doesn't have the actual name. The Book of Lost Names is actually there in that library, but it was a coded book that was able to slip through the authorities because they assumed it looked like a religious book, and it is now currently housed in the Berlin Library. So it is an actual book. Anybody want to share how you think the novel's title relates to the actual events that are portrayed in the story? How the novel's title relates to actual events.
Well, the children were lost, so it certainly goes in with the lost names.
No, that is true.
And they were protected, which was great. Somewhat.
Anybody else want to share?
Without her efforts and the efforts of the real person who had the real book, those children would never have known who they were. I mean, I think it's a remarkable thing that I never knew happened.
Me either. It was fascinating.
So it leads us into our next question. Early in the novel, Eva's mother states, "If we lose our goodness, we let them erase us. We cannot do that, Eva. We cannot. We just cannot." How do you think this statement affects Eva and the storyline? If we lose our goodness, we let them erase us.
I highlighted that early on as one of the big theme statements that I thought, I can't ever get out of that English teacher mode, especially as I'm in the middle of teaching theme right now with my 8th graders. But I just felt like that was so indicative of what was coming. And so many of the fights that Eva and her mom had throughout the book, I felt like were, fell back to this statement that Eva took it a completely different way than her mother took it, that her mother used kindness almost to mean, or goodness to mean like obligation, where Eva meant to perpetuate the life and gentility of children. That word was so fluid in their own understanding was interesting.
Eva's mother was so much more old-fashioned and almost a village woman at heart, even though she'd been living in Paris. And she seemed to view everything in sort of a negative way instead of a positive one, whereas Eva's going to see it in a good way, and she's
And that leads us to our next question. How did Eva and her mother's relationship change throughout the novel? And in what ways?
I didn't actually read the book, so I'm not sure I'm
Oh.
able to answer that. So I don't know, but I'm interested to hear how.
Yeah,
I'm gonna throw that one back to you.
I'm gonna fess up. I couldn't get a copy of the book either. I think I'm still like 7th in line, and I also had to hold on it through Texas where I used to work, and I'm like 36th in line. So I'm sure
no.
it's a good book, but I'm just gonna listen to y'all. So if I'm just sitting here twiddling my thumbs, trust me, I'm getting a preview from you guys.
Good news is it's a fast read and it's super good. Like, it really is one of those unputdownable books. So once you get it, you're in luck. Like,
I agree with you. You can't put it down.
I think as far as their relationship changing, it feels so much just like any real life parent and child relationship changes, that there comes a point where you have to stake your claim into what your identity is. And with Eva, it was picking her own path in religion, which I think is a big point in, and even my generation has kind of delineated its separation from our parents' religion, which I think that we've seen a lot of that in like even a progressive Christianity sort of way, where children of my generation, if they did stay with the church, went with a very different idea of where our, relationship with the church is. And Eva spent so much of this book warring with like, where do I fall with my belief in Judaism? My father prayed and he was still taken away. Like, these prayers did nothing for him. And, and I think that is such a common theme also in so many of these kind of coming of age tales for people, that it was such a kind of common struggle that we saw with her.
Yes, her mother thought, like someone else was referring to earlier, the fact of she was supposed to be good and she was supposed to stay true to the family values and to who she was as a Jewish person and as a young child, a young adult female in those days. And we got to remember also that Eva was just a young adult at this time too. So as Paul was alluding to earlier, of course, that would be natural for most any person of that age, particularly in those traumatic times as well. We also have to recall that Eva was there when her father was arrested, and that was very traumatizing, I would imagine. So surely that affected the mother's relationship with Eva, and the fact it was just the two of them together. And they had to make their own way in a lot of ways. And I'm not so sure whether the mother, how strong she was at points, as far as making those decisions. I think basically she was going along with what Eva had to, actually Eva in some ways was the stronger one of her and her mom.
I think the relationship changed back and forth. The mother's taking care of the daughter at the outset, and then we end up with Eva taking care of the mother or directing their life, so to speak. So And I kind of think that reflects on our life today. As we age, then our children, we get to a certain point, start kind of helping guide us to a certain area of our life. And I think that was reflected in the book with their relationship as well.
Excellent point. Thank you for commenting on that one. And also, Eva did see some atrocities, so I'm sure that was very traumatic, and I'm sure that, in fact, she one point made a comment, I'm paraphrasing it basically, but she said something to the fact that she thought the soldiers had like a switch they could turn off their feelings. And she thought how sad that it was that they could just be uncaring. And she was wondering perhaps maybe she could, I'm thinking she didn't really say this, but I'm thinking maybe she had wished she could do that somewhat in her own way for not to have to deal with the atrocities and the sadness, I would think.
Well, and think about how this whole situation must have messed with her psyche. I mean, so much of this book, she is unsure of who she can trust. And so many times she questions the people that she has trusted along the way. All of a sudden, something throws a wrench in that. And all of a sudden, she doesn't know if that's a person she can trust. And so it seems like, around every corner, her life is flipped upside down one more time. That must just keep you on high alert and full of adrenaline 24/7. Sure.
Excellent point on that one. There are various people who she has to, I guess you would say, depend on, particularly when they make all those moves and changes and all that. And then along the way, she meets this young man who plays a very major role. His name is Remy. And of course, they develop a relationship, but they also kind of hone their skills and the kind of partner, and they figure out this unique code. Anyone want to share about Remy as a character in the book and his role?
Oh no. I got late. I think I just got it out. Can't see it very well.
Those obviously had a chance to read the book. Do you think it was a good relationship, or did it have its positives and had its negatives?
I spent so much of this book wanting to like Remy. Like, I really want to like him, and I see why she adores him for most of the book, but his initial charm, I feel like, must be hiding something. And then he switches from this like charming kind of I will always have your back debonair kind of suavity to he wants to be doing more and he needs to be on the front lines, and it just feels like he always has something to prove. And so I just never could commit to this character, and I kept wanting to because she was clearly committed to this character and our author was committed to this character, and I could not personally commit to him.
But that's what made the story interesting.
He did seem a little shady. And then she finds out he was a professional forger to start with. And, but he does so much for her. He takes her to the, isn't he the one who takes her to the prison camp to try and rescue her father?
Yeah.
Her father's already been shot. I mean, he really did a lot of dangerous things. So I think she trusted him because he was taking risks for her and for her family. I think I've shut off my picture somehow, but anyway, I think you can still.
We see you.
We can see you.
Okay.
Okay.
Both of you.
Okay.
Hey, Gerald.
I didn't read the book, sorry.
That's okay.
I'm enjoying hearing about it though.
And Kathy, what are your thoughts on Remy?
I agree with Paul. I kind of thought he was maybe the one who was going to actually do it, but how they figured out the secret code is they used their math. And she was a whiz at
The
math.
Fibonacci sequence,
math.
yeah.
And then they had also interplay with religion, and the thing is, Eva was so strong on her feelings of support for those children that she thought, this can't happen. They cannot be erased. They cannot be forgotten. She was just so strong on her thoughts on that she really wanted to save them as a person, that they would not go to wasted, so to speak, in our world. She wanted to have them remembered, not forgotten.
And their origin too.
That is true. That is important. Yeah.
I think both Eva and her mother were very much affected by the fact that they were immigrants to France and they'd had to adapt to a new community. And of course, to her mother, keeping that identity was so important.
That's a good point.
I think it was incredible the lengths that they went to find names for the children, all the records and historical things they went through to find something that was plausible, because apparently the authorities went through every single thing to look to see that they matched or they knew them. That's how they got caught at some point, because they realized one of the Germans knew this family and it wasn't this name that they had given this individual. So I thought that was incredible, the work that they went through to do that.
Yes, they were just always on the knife edge of being discovered or having the child be discovered before they could be got out of the country. And that made the book very exciting, I thought.
It did.
Mm.
Back to the mom and the daughter relationship, there was the issue of the daughter becoming, quote, Catholic for a while, or in a Catholic situation, and the mom was just, of course, horrified. Here it is, her daughter, is involved in all this, and the mom thinks she's, you're abandoning your faith, you're abandoning our family, you're abandoning who you are. So it's ironic that she goes to all those lengths of preserving the children's lives and their names, and yet she makes modifications in her own life so that she can do what she feels is her mission, so to speak. Even she didn't really renounce Judaism, but she kind of, I don't know whether it was a convenience thing for her to go to the Catholic Church, or maybe because the Catholic Church was helping to shelter her or provide for her, type thing. So again, that could be a major contention was between the mother and the daughter, was that of religion?
Well, and I think it goes beyond just religion, because it is clear that the mother and father moved there to escape the anti-Semitism in Poland, and that they had sought a better life for Eva in France. And so they had sacrificed a lot for the life that they had in France. And so for them to have done all this and then her renounce it, I think was the bigger issue. And while yes, the fight was about Catholicism and religion on the outside, I think deeper it was the identity, and we did all of this so that you could have a much better existence, and this is the treatment, this is the thanks that we get. Your father has been carted away, and for all we know he's dead, and the way you thank him is by giving up everything we've ever sacrificed.
And like Sherry alluded to earlier, I think that kind of relates to even some relationships today, and what the parents are thinking on some issues, especially now. Look what we've done to help you have a better life and to make things better for you. And then the children sometimes become rebellious, although she really didn't become rebellious in the sense that a lot of young adults do. She was just so sold on her mission and her path.
I mean, I would argue that having a secret forgery ring to sneak people out of the borders of a country is pretty rebellious.
Well, her mother just wanted to be safe. She just wanted to get over there to Switzerland and go find her husband. And she couldn't understand, I guess, why Eva was doing all this dangerous stuff. So that's a conflict.
And she was afraid for her own daughter too, her safety. And I think that's a mother role.
That's
When-
true. And she wouldn't leave, you know, she wouldn't go without her. So
Good points.
I mean, the mother wouldn't go without Evas.
Were you surprised that Joseph was the one who betrayed the network?
Not at all. I was not even surprised a little bit. I knew when we introduced him in the opening chapter that I was going to hate him. When they made a big deal of saying they had been best friends, like their moms had been best friends centuries back and back and back and back, like Giver style, I was prepared for him to be the villain.
You could spot it right on.
I think I've gotten to a point where I have read too many books and I can predict a plot. So like I need something to really throw me a twist at this point.
He was too stuck on himself at the outset. It was
100%.
he wasn't likable at all.
Did Joseph get his comeuppance?
Yes. Well, and maybe it just really put me off whenever Eva was absolutely not interested in his advances at that dinner, and he just kind of kept pushing like, "Oh no, but wouldn't you agree? I'm not saying we should date, but we'd be a great couple. I mean, your mom's right. You're beautiful, and have you seen me?" And she's like, "Can you seriously not? Because I'm like busy saving the lives of hundreds of children." And he's like, "But don't you think I'm hot?" And she's like, "But listen, I'm still writing names here." Like maybe it was that point that I just like really flipped the switch and I was done with him.
Oh, I just love how you retell the story. I love it.
The young adult novel now.
I muted myself to then tell you a story. Yeah. I teach 8th graders every single day. I have to keep things entertaining.
You do a
must be
great
doing a
job.
Well, thank you.
He also is it very entertaining in our book club meetings too. Always brings out good points too. And yes, I sometimes agree with him. In that case, I did with that comment too, how about Joseph stuck on himself, or as Gerald said, come up with.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden we have another guy appear on the scene, Lewis. Were you surprised about that relationship?
I remember Lewis.
I mean, I feel like she had told us Lewis in all of her reflections, so we knew that that was eventually like where it was going to go, right? I didn't dream that, did I?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it was
Okay.
retrospective, and we knew where that was going, and I'm kind of glad she moved on, because why do we, she waited for how many years going up to the library to wait for this Remy guy, and I think she was right to move on at some point.
Well, she had to. She couldn't just stay forever waiting. And this meant she could go to America and she could have a new life.
Right.
And I think that kind of probably would be like another theme of people moving on to new lives when someone
Things are closing in, and it's time to.
Right. It's like she gave new life to the children, like Miss Betty referring to earlier about the children were lost.
Uh-huh. Well, and I found it so interesting that it was important to her to keep the identities, to keep the names of all the children, but she reflected so many times on how she had not kept that for herself, that her son did not know her story, and how she had wronged him that way. Like I found that a very interesting juxtaposition.
Yes. And and the arc of the story is kind of like Eva's life being put back together. She has this enormous, scary adventure early in her life, and then it all sort of gets erased, and she doesn't even tell her son about it. And then at the end, it all has to come out and be reconciled. I think that was the strength of the novel's plot.
Now, as retired librarians, Miss Betty and Cindy, I'm going to ask you this question. She was at that point in life where she was getting close to retirement. Maybe when she sees this, happen chance the magazine, and then she reads the article, and then she starts thinking back. And she decides to make, all of a sudden, uncharacteristic of her as most librarians with our own little routines. Well, she decides, I'm going to go to Paris. And it's like, wait a minute, you're not going to Paris? Why are you going to Paris? And then all of a sudden, there she is, wanting to go back. And then that's at that time that she recalls she feels compelled to go back to go tell the story and let them know about the book.
Yeah, I think she's a risk taker. I mean, she had to learn to be a risk taker when she took on this project, and it's been dormant for all these years, and now she's ready to take a chance again. I think.
I think her son thought she was probably going around the bend a little bit when she wants to take off and go to Berlin. Our children look at us at a certain point in life like, oh my gosh, something's already up with mom. We got to watch her.
Yes.
And then, here she's going to take off. And then she doesn't tell him that she moved her plane flight up to get ahead of him, and to go ahead and leave. I bet he really freaked out whenever he found that out,
I bet so.
So I thought it was great.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
Oh, there was in that spot, she said something that I thought was so profound. Let me find it. I highlighted in my Kindle. Something along the lines of the truth. Because she was like, I didn't lie to him, not exactly.
One of those kind of lines.
Yeah, well, it's something
Where
along
have
the
we heard that
lines
before?
of she had found that the truth was in the way that you tell it. The way that the author wrote it was so interesting, and I'm in that chapter and I don't see the line. So life turns, nope, that's not it. I'll come back to it one day so y'all can move on without me.
Again, like Sherry alluded to earlier, of the role of life has changed. That she's being the mom, and she changes, and then the kid, and then she says what Paul was referring to. I didn't exactly tell the truth. I didn't exactly lie. I didn't just tell the whole truth. Is basically what she said. I sometimes think you have been known to say that or refer to something like that or paraphrase it. And I think that's, she was determined to do it no matter what. Kind of like what you're referring to, Cindy, that she was a risk taker.
Yeah, it just finally came back, I think.
And as I had learned long ago, the truth is in the nuances. That I found that to be a very profound quote that I wanted to highlight. I knew it was somewhere in here.
That's so true.
That's so true. And looking back at her career as a forger, I mean, everything was in the details for her. She was risking a child's life every time she made one of these documents. And I mean, I'm thinking if I had to make watercolor drawings of a stamp, a rubber stamp or something, I would never be able to make it matching, but she would have had to. So nuances were important for that too, I guess.
Materials that they used, what they described of how they came up with all this, the rollers they made to make the various stamps on the documents and the colors, the meticulous details, they had to take hours.
Yeah.
But the thought that went into figuring out what materials they could use to replicate all this and to get the different types of paper to use. They had different paper for different documents, and in wartime, a lot of that, stuff was really scarce to find.
Probably, obviously so, but on the other hand, their goal was so important that they would do anything to find the way to make those documents.
And there was such a big network helping them. I mean, some of the papers I think had been faked in North Africa and somehow gotten to France so they could make the documents. I mean, it was a vast number of people who didn't know each other who were
The
working.
underground.
Yes, it was.
And
And-
probably the fear that went along with it. You said the number of people, the fear of who can you really trust? And, you know, who's going to, like Joseph in the end ends up being the traitor, but, you know, there were so many people to trust in uncertain times.
That's the truth. But they were so inventive, you know, like Eva's idea of using the mimeograph machine. I mean, who would have thought of that, you know, but they used whatever technology they had, and they had to, I guess they had to risk depending on one another because they didn't have any choice, you know.
And I'm glad you brought up the issue of trust, because certainly they had to trust a lot of people with a lot of issues and a lot of matters that were very, very important and vital. And such as where they had stayed, you know, that lady could, how would they know that she really was who she said she was, and that she could be trusted to keep them safe? And even that priest, you know,
Yeah.
kind of tried to guide Evans. I think he tried to let her know that she was in very dangerous work, and he said, you know, you need to be careful of your contacts, what you're doing, and who you're with.
I think he tried to warn her about Joseph at some point. I'm trying to remember but there were people who were doubtful about Joseph.
Yeah, so whenever she overheard him talking to the German soldier, you know, she tried to find Joseph, and the bookshop owner and the priest both advised her, you know, don't go there. And while neither one just outright said he's not trustworthy, I did get the impression that, like, we don't have 100% faith in him. What they both said was like, please just trust, you know, the priest. And so I think that we were given, you know, that was like chapter 22 or 23. So well before the sellout happened, that we were given this inkling that something was not right here.
I almost thought the traitor was going to be that other young woman who had come to help.
Genevieve, I thought that was for a while. And then when she was all for helping Remy with the fake documents, I don't know, that part won me over, but then I was like, ooh, is this going to be the twist? Like, maybe this writer did stump me. Maybe we got it here.
Yeah, because she seemed kind of smarmy, you know, like she was trying to learn all the secrets, but that was a surprise too. She was really, really good.
How she was left to die was so horrible, to being shot and then just being left up there, and even discovering her, that had to be horrifying.
Yes. But, you know, lucky for Eva that she was still alive and she found her, and she, you know, learned more from her as she was dying. I mean, it's terrible to say, but maybe it was an important plot point.
Here's a big question for the group. What role did books and libraries have in this novel? Think of various situations.
Well, so I thought this whole book was a love letter to books. There were so many beautiful quotes that the author left. In the first chapter, he said, or she said rather, she doesn't understand what it means to love books so passionately that you would die without them, that you would simply stop breathing, stop existing. And then these kinds of things are peppered throughout. So I just felt like this whole thing was a love letter to books and reading.
That's a great way to express it.
And librarians, you know, I mean,
Oh,
you know,
100%.
We're book lovers. For sure.
It seems like that
And
was the perfect book for February, since it's Library Lovers Month. So it just fits. Perfect choice.
Stood up so many times by Remy, supposedly at the library too. That's another part about how libraries were involved in the novel as well. Eva also made a comment at some point, said about the children, that those would be the ones who make it, that felt that books were magic.
Yes. She said of her father that he had taught her to love reading, one of the greatest gifts a parent could give a child, and in doing so, he had opened the world to her. And then the whole little scene with Anne, the little girl who loved the Wizard of Oz and found hope in the Wizard of Oz, and in Eva finding hope in the themes of the Wizard of Oz. I just found that whole little scene beautiful. It probably helps that that's also one of my favorite books, and so I connected with that on a personal level.
Sure. Good for you.
I also thought about the theme of why they would have the Wizard of Oz, and that is, of course, there's no place like home. You know, there's a reoccurring theme in that movie that she just wants to desperately Dorothy wants to get back home. And I think even her own mom wanted to get back, no matter how bad it was, back to what she would consider home, like it used to be, like her old normal, so to speak. Getting back to what things used to be like
Good point.
with her family.
And you know, her experience just suddenly being parachuted into this strange life of living in a small town and being a forger and pretending to be a Catholic so that she didn't arouse any suspicion. That was almost like Oz, if we think about it. She was just kind of thrown into this strange new life.
Yeah.
Well, the mom herself, you know, was always wanting to go back to Paris, no matter what the circumstances were. She couldn't understand that she couldn't go back. She wanted to go back to their apartment, and the traitorous neighbor, you know, they turned her in, I think, basically just so they could get the apartment that they were living in. And I mean, it was just, and she kept wanting to go back there, and it doesn't matter, you know, that there's Germans and there's all these things, you know, and you can't go back because you don't have a home. That was so hard for the mom to fathom, you know, that it was theirs. So that was very difficult for the mom at that point.
And for your own neighbor to turn on you like that. Sorry.
They set her up, yeah.
I can't see your faces because I think I got out of the screen, so I'm talking out of turn. But
It's always interesting to me, going back to that issue of trust y'all talked about earlier. If you read like true stories of things that happened in the Holocaust and also even during the Cold War, like the amount of trust that you have to have in your neighbor, in your community, in these people that you're working with. I mean, it's astonishing to think about how perilous these situations were for everyone on an everyday level, both. And it sounds like that's really reflected in the book, which is good because that's very much the real life experience that people had.
yes, and the Nazis, you know, that was how they worked, was to break down society by breaking the bonds of trust between members of a community, to make people distrust the Jews, you know, to benefit themselves by making people distrust each other, basically. So it took so much courage to trust anyone, I'm sure.
Toward the novel's end, there's a quote that says, we aren't defined by our names or our religion or our country's flag that we carry. We are defined by our hearts. Do you agree with that statement or not? We're not defined by our names or religion or our country's flag, but by our hearts.
Well, it's very profound for sure. And the book brought that out. So that's a great thing to bring up for discussion.
Well, when nothing, you know, everything else was stripped away in that situation. Everything, you know, religion, nationality, nothing mattered. Nothing was solid, I guess I'm trying to say, other than just you know, how you perceive the next person and if you believed you could trust them and they had a good heart.
I think that's the key point. It's how people see us. Yes, we are defined by all those things, but we ourselves, personally speaking, are defined by our heart. But it's those that look at us, they know, you know, if they know our religion or our name or who we are, our politics, whatever it might be, they're defining us by their perceptions, but we might not feel that way of how they see us, my opinion.
That's a good point.
I think the statement is really profound and true because at the end of the day, regardless of what our religion or our nationality are, at the end of the day, we're all people and we all have hearts, and it's all about how you treat, you know, your fellow man. And so it doesn't matter where you come from, you can still be a good person. And I think at the end of the day, our actions speak towards what really defines us. You know, people, when we're gone, they'll remember how we treated others, not that we were a Catholic or, you know, we were from America. It's that they were a good person, you know, that was a good person I could talk to. So I
mean,
agree with that statement.
yeah. You've got to keep in mind, that's the whole point of humanitarian efforts. I mean, how many times, Katrina, you know, how many people came to Louisiana to help us out that who remembers where everybody's from? Other areas of the Louisiana, other areas of the country, international. I mean, they would have, even sometimes with hurricanes recently, you'll have electricians coming from Canada to come help get power back on. Or when everything happens overseas, people send money, they volunteer their time and efforts. I mean, I think a lot of times people forget that statement and what it's about, but at the same time, I think there's a core of truth. Otherwise, you wouldn't see people doing those kinds of things.
Well, and I think it kind of takes on a different meaning when you look at it through different lenses. Like, if we look at it contextually in this time period, like so much of what these characters were dealing with is, you know, there was a very real problem with, there were very Jewish names and they were being prosecuted because of that. And so it was a very real, like, they were finding, and you know, and I talked about it earlier, that Eva's mom was finding her identity in being Jewish, and they were being persecuted rather for their cultural identity, and that's tied up in your name. But we can transcend that into today, and it becomes a universal truth. And coming out of, you know, the political season we just left, where there was such broken speech on all sides, where there was just hate being spewed everywhere, that it's like, we have always existed in a world where there have been people who existed to break us up, because that's how discourse has been meant to exist, it seems. And we forget that at the heart of it all, we are human beings. And so I think as you move the lens and see where we're looking and approaching that quote from, it's got a very different meaning.
One of the identity things that struck me when you were talking is about they were even the point where when they're doing their documents, they're taking the measurement of the individual's nose, their identity as the Jewish culture was perceived because of the size of their nose. So on their document, they would write small, medium, or large nose. And I thought, my gosh, you know, it's just unbelievable that things like that happen. I'm sure probably something crazy like that still goes on somewhere today, unfortunately. But that was just mind-boggling to me, to be to that detail. Even if you didn't have a Jewish name, they looked at your hair coloring, the color of your skin, the size of your nose. It was just incredible.
And that filtered right down to ordinary people too, because on one of the journeys that she takes with Remy, maybe there was only one, where she's posing as his wife. She's separated from him for a little while, and the guard gets hold of her and he's about to take her away or something, and Remy rescues her, but the guard says, your wife looks very Jewish, you better keep her close to you. So people went by appearances even without that kind of documentation.
And how crazy that their life was a collection of documents, you know, like to prove that they were who they were, they had a ticket for riding their bike without a lamp. Like, I can't imagine if I got pulled over because my taillight was out on my car and I had to prove who I was, and I'm pulling things out of my glove box, like praying to God I've got something besides my driver's license that I could provide anything besides my insurance card, you know?
Yeah, well, the whole premise of their forgery was that these documents were, they represented a life, you know, there was life that they were saving.
A life to live too.
Yes.
I don't know that I could have resisted getting creative with it. Like, let's make this one real fun. Let's give her a fun backstory. Let's make this a referral from the 3rd grade where she punched the principal. She's sassy. Like,
Yeah, that could be a temptation for a novelist, I think.
And in the back of the book is, of course, the author's note. And I have a couple of sentences from that section. It says, you don't need money or a big platform to change the world. Sometimes something as simple as a pen and a bit of imagination can alter the course of history. So Paul, keep up your good work up with those students and
well, thank you.
for the writers of the world like yourself and others. So writers can also change the world, not just forgers. Librarians can change the world, obviously, too. Has effect on children and others, and parents. Anybody else have any concluding comments or opinions?
This isn't very profound, but I really appreciated that the author, yeah, I thought this was going to be an extremely harrowing book. I mean, she did show us clearly what dangers were there, and some terrible things happened, but we were kind of preserved from having to see most of the carnage. And, you know, I think that made it easier for me to read.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah.
That was kind of, it made it easier. It made it, I think, more effective to put across her point, because she didn't distract us with a lot of gory and really horrible stuff. So.
Was it a surprise to anyone else that her father survived Auschwitz?
Yes.
Yes.
That blew me away. I figured he was dead, you know, the way the book didn't really go back to him a whole lot, didn't give any of his time in the prison. And so I thought he was dead. And then when he shows up at the end, that just blew me away.
Well, and when Eva and her partner go to the prison camp, don't the camp people say, "Oh, never mind, we shot him yesterday," or something like that?
No,
So,
they say he'd been deported the day before.
Deported. Okay, I'm sorry, that was but they realized, they thought it was hopeless. So, you know. Yeah, her mother died, but her father didn't. That was very ironic.
Yeah. Well, he died, they said a couple of years later from cancer or something. I think he lived for a couple of more years. He's the one that convinced her to move on with her life.
Right, yes, that's right. That's right. I think the abiding love between the 3 members of that family was one of the inspiring things about the novel, too. In spite of everything.
You don't like to think it, but you know life was a crapshoot. You never know that ending is really kind of perfect. I think that's kind of interesting, because that's just the way things happen. The person you think is going to be is safe is not going to be in harm. Does, and when you think it's lost, it's found. You know, that's kind of the way life really is.
Thank you, Gerald. That was profound.
No.
He didn't read the book. Don't give him too much credit.
I've read a lot of books, and there are many who are like that. You know, really, it's literarily a very strong device to use. It's also true to life.
Plus, we're finding in this COVID era, you know, people die who shouldn't have died, and then, you know, very elderly people may make it through. So you just don't never know.
Mhm.
Any other concluding thoughts? Well, if there are none, I would just like to thank all of you guys for joining us for this virtual book club discussion. I promise that I will read the book. I've added it to my to be read list, and I'll let you know what I think of it when it's done. Again, thank you guys. And our next virtual book club meeting is going to be on March 9th, and we will be discussing Ender's Game. It's a science fiction novel with aliens and war and military battles and space battles and all that good stuff.
It's my favorite book of all time.
Is it? Well,
It
I
is.
just started reading it, so I will be prepared.
So good.
Awesome. So if you guys are interested in joining that, I will send you the link to sign up for that book club meeting after this one has wrapped up and we've uploaded it to our YouTube channel. And if you want to see any of our old book club meetings, you can go to the Shreve Memorial Library YouTube channel, and they're all there ready for you to enjoy at your leisure.
Thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, no, this is my pleasure. I enjoy it. And this is how I found out about my new books and the books I want to read. So this has been awesome. And this sounds like it was a really good, interesting book. And I can't wait to read it. So I thank you guys. And Kathy, I thank you for leading the discussion and picking out this wonderful book. Great choice. And I also want to give Kathy a shout out because she wore a matching mask and shirt to go with the color of the book today. So she was really prepared. And she also has a flyer for our Ender's Game for the next book club meeting behind her there. So she's doing a great job of promotion.
Thank you, Kathy.
Great job,
Always
Kathy.
does. Yes.
Just a heads up, Kathy and I have talked before. I'm her boss, in case you didn't know. I'm just sitting in, moral support. And also, I really wanted to hear about the book. I'm sorry I couldn't get a copy of it. But the Red River Readers Book Club is planning on doing another virtual book club like this. We just haven't set a date yet. But so just keep an eye out. If you come into the branch, we normally have flyers up for all of the virtual book clubs, all of the virtual programs. So just keep an ear out. We'll be meeting again, guys.
Thank you.
Awesome.
It's wonderful.
All
Great.
right.
Well,
Well, if there's nothing else, I will let you guys go. You all have a great night. This was a lot of fun and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Have a good night.
I wish to give a
Okay.
shout out to my Red River Readers members and Miss Sherry too for joining us. And also for my great team here at the Grove. Can do
All
it.
All right, way to go.
And
Great.
Samantha at SML.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. All right. Well, if that's it, good night, everyone.
Hey.
Bye.